The Love of Clotilde by Armando Palacio Valdés in the dressing room of Clotilde, leading actress of one of the most important theaters in the capital. They're gathered every night. About half a dozen of her male friends. A reception lasted almost always about as long as the performances, but included a number of parentheses. Whenever the actress was obliged to change her costume, she would turn towards her visitors with a bewitching smile and beseeching eyes, "Gentlemen, will you withdraw for one little moment, not more than one little moment." Thereupon they would all transfer themselves to the anteroom and remain there patiently waiting. No, I am mistaken, not quite all, because the youngest of them, a third-year student in the School of Medicine, would avail himself of the chance to take a turn in the wings to stretch his legs and snatch a fugitive kiss, or so at all events a majority remained either seated or pacing up and down until the moment when Clotilde would reopen her door and, putting out her head decked as queen or peasant girl, according to the part she was playing, would call out, "Now you may come back, gentlemen. Have I been very long?" Don Geronimo always lingered. He was the last to withdraw grumbling and the first to return to the dressing room. He was never able to reconcile himself to that modest custom, and although he never allowed himself to say so openly, yet in the depths of his secret thoughts he regarded it as a lack of courtesy that he should be ejected from his seat merely because the silly child must change her dress, he who for 30 years had passed his life behind the scenes and had been on intimate terms with every actor and actress, ancient and modern. He was 54 years of age and had been attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs ever since he was 420. Each successive government had regarded him as one of the indispensable wheels in the machinery of colonial administration. Furthermore, he was a bachelor and living at the mercy of his landlady. It was said that in his youth he once wrote a play which won him nothing but hisses and free entry for life behind the scenes of the theaters, whether resigned or not. To the verdict of the public, he ceased to write plays and assumed instead the nobler role of patron to unrecognized authors and artists, and to ruin managers. Any youth from the provinces who arrived in Madrid with drama in his pocket could take no sure road to seeing it produced than that which led the home of Don Geronimo I, and all he received them with open arms of good, and the bad alike. There is no denying that since he was rather brusque in his ways, he never spared the young authors who asked his advice and read in their productions, but criticized vigorously, even to the verge of insult. The whole episode is sheer nonsense. Spill your inkwell on it. Why look here, for the love of heaven? How do you suppose that a man who is on the point of committing murder is going to stand there for 16 seconds without drawing his breath? Lord, what Tommy wrought platonic love for woman of that class, she must have tumbled out of the nest. Unfledged, my lad. But anyone possessed of a little tact refused to take offense, but went calmly on and ended by entrusting his manuscript to the hands of Don Geronimo, and he could rest assured that his drama will be produced. A veteran of the green rooms, exercised a strong influence akin to intimidation over managers and actors alike. When he was displeased, he gave his tongue free rein. If a play had been hissed, he would protest, boiling with rage against the public verdict, and would continue to support the author more staunchly than ever. If on the contrary it scored a hit, he merely kept silent and smiled ecstatically, but never sought out the successful author in order to congratulate him. And if the latter should complain of his indifference, his answer was, "Now that you've been shown that you can use your wings, will you please, my friend, will you please leave me free to succor some other poor fellow?" His private life offered little special interest. Every night upon leaving the theater, he betook himself to the Café Habanero, where he habitually consumed a beefsteak together with a small measure of beer, and according to a certain friend who had watched him repeatedly, he always managed his repast so artfully as to finish at one and the same time the last mouthful of the meat, the last fragment of bread, and the last draught of beer on. This particular night, the little gathering was unwontedly animated. The actors' friends indulged more freely than usual in gossip and laughter. Don Geronimo, muffled closely in his cape, one of his privileges, lounging at ease in the big corner chair, and with his inevitable cigar between his teeth, another special privilege, was giving utterance to rare and racy stories, which from time to time caused his hearers to cast a glance in the direction of Clotilde and brought a slightly heightened color to the latter's cheeks. Don Geronimo took no notice of this. He had first known her such a mere child that he considered he had the right to dispense with certain courtesies that are due to ladies, assuming that in the whole course of his life he had ever shown them to any woman, which is very doubtful. He had met her first as a mere child and had opened the way for her to the stage at the time that he ran across her. She was living wretchedly and trying to learn the art of making artificial flowers today. Thanks to her talent, she earned enough to keep her. Mother and sisters in Comfort Claudia's attraction lay in her charm of manner rather than her beauty. Her complexion was olive, her eyes large, and black the best of all her features, her mouth somewhat big, but with bright red lips and admirably even teeth tonight. She was costumed as a lady of the time of Louis X-15 with powdered hair, which was marvelously becoming to her. She took almost no part in the conversation, but seemed dissatisfied to be merely a listener, constantly turning her serene gaze from one speaker to another and often answering only with a smile. When they addressed her all at once, there came the voice of the call boy, Senorita Corsair. If you please come in, she answered, rising. She crossed over to the mirror, gave a few final touches to her brows, and lashes with pencil adjusted with somewhat nervous fingers the coils of her hair, the cross of brilliance, which she wore at her throat, and the fold as her dress her friends became for. The moment silent and abstractedly watched. These last preparations goodbye for the present gentleman, and she left the dressing room, followed by her maid carefully bearing her train, a magnificent train of cream-colored satin. She grows lovelier every day, Croa does, said the medical student, allowing an imperceptible sigh to escape him. Don Geronimo took an enormous pull at a cigar and instantly became enveloped in a cloud of smoke. For this reason, no one observed the smile of triumph with which she received the medical student's remark. I agree with you that she grows prettier every day, said another of the visitors, but it seems to me that her disposition has been undergoing a big change. For some time back, you, my boy, have not known her as long as we have. She used to be a fascinating talker, so merry, so full of spirits, no one could ever remain out of temper in her company. But now I find her grave and sad almost all the time at the fact that I have wondered at the melancholy look in her eyes. Don Geronimo took another enormous pull at the cigar. No one saw the swift flare of anger that passed over his face. Changes like that, my boy, have only one cause, and that is love, which she engaged precisely. Don Geronimo knows the story. Well, yes, and I am going to tell it to you, said the one referred to from the depth of his cloak, though you may believe me that it is no pleasant task to relate such follies, but concerns a girl whom we all of us love, and whatever affect her ought to interest us. Some 3 years ago, a young man, faultlessly dressed and with a manuscript of a play under his arm, called upon the director of this theater. Now there is nothing in the world more impressive and awe-inspiring than a well-dressed young man who carries a manuscript of a play under his arm. The director did his best to dodge him and held him off with a number of odd moves, but he was finally cornered all the same. In other words, a young man invited him to breakfast one day, enticing him with a seductive prospect of several dozen oysters washed down with abundant sort. And for dessert, he shut off his play at close range. As it turned out, the play was no good. Pepe did what you know one does in such cases. He expressed deep admiration for the versification. He said bravo over certain obscurely phrased thoughts, and finally, he recommended a few changes in the second act, after which the work would be unexceptionable. The unwary poet returned home greatly pleased and set to work zealously upon a revision at the end of a fortnight. He returned for another interview with Pepe. This time the latter found the first act somewhat slow and advised him at any cost to put more action into it and make it somewhat shorter. It took the poet a month to rewrite the first act, when he once more presented himself to the director while expressing great admiration for the excellence of the verse and for some of the ideas. Manifested some doubt as to whether the play was actable, that it was literary. He had none whatever. On the contrary, it seemed to him that from this point of view it compared favorably with the best of all his plays. But actable, really actable, huh? That was another matter. What is the difference here on? I don't understand, and I will explain, my boy. We who are behind the scenes mean by actable a good play, and by literary a bad one. I see. After expressing these doubts, the manager concluded by recommending certain additional alterations in the third act. At last the poet understood a really marvelous occurrence, because poets who understand everything else and can tell you why the condor flies so high, who soar to the skies and descend into the abyss and penetrate the secret thoughts of all created things, are not capable of realizing that there are times when their works do not please those who hear them. Our young man, whom we will call in Ocencia, received back his manuscript somewhat peevishly, and FOT with stammering lips that she would do him the favor of listening while he read his play. Women, you know, find a singular pleasure in playing the role of Patronus, especially in regard to young men of pleasant manners and fashionable dress. So that it is not all surprising that Crow listened patiently to the play, and even pronounced it acceptable. The young man entrusted himself wholly to her guidance, deposited his manuscript in her pretty hands as though it were a newborn child. and Chireques were well known to everyone, but that he dared not build upon such an illusion. Claude had declared that there were many unmerited reputations in the world, and one of them was hers, but that on this occasion she felt that she was on firm ground. The young man replied that when the river roars, the water toils, and that when the whole world unites in admiring not only the exceptional beauty and artistic inspiration of a certain person, but also her splendid genius and brilliant intellect, it was met her equal, with the result that the manuscript was momentarily gaining ground in the heart of our sympathetic friend, and that the young man, overwhelmed with emotion, took his leave of her until following day. On the following day, Croida called upon the manager, and by threatening to break her contract, forced him a promise to produce an Encio's play as soon as possible. That same afternoon, the poet expressed his thanks to his patroness and promptly took her into his confidence. His eye, would he succeed in being an Ayala or Tamayo? Would he be rejected by the public? It was an insoluble mystery to him. During this interview, Claude became convinced of two very important things, namely, that Inocencio possessed a talent so great that his head could scarcely hold it, and secondly, that there was no one else in all Madrid who could wear so conspicuous a necktie with such charming effect. I need not tell you that. Their confidential interviews increased in frequency, and while the rehearsals of Inocencio's play had begun, it was called, if I am not mistaken, Stooping to Conquer. Excuse me, no, I believe it was just the reverse, conquering to stoop, while at all events it contained a participle and an infinitive. Before long, I became aware that the lover-like relations had been established between our fair friend and the author, and since, as a matter of fact, even if Inocencio was a bad poet, as Pepe insisted he seemed like a good lad, I was very glad it had happened Ted with love, and to receive all the applause in the world. In short, gentlemen, our young fool was living in the midst of an idyllic dream, and Encio was to all appearance no less in love than she. I frequently encountered them walking to the unfrequented by paths of Retiro at a respectful distance from her mother, who lingered opportunely to examine the first opening buds of flowers or some curious insect. Mothers at this critical period of courtship are under an obligation to be admired, wedding which was still in the bud. Everybody was delighted because Claude is the only actress since the beginning of the world who took into her head to attend what until now was regarded as impossible, to make herself beloved by her companions. I observe, nevertheless, for you know that I am an observant person. It is the only quality that I possess, that of observation, a thing to which the authors of today attach no importance. Today in the drama, everything is so much dry, it leaves a lot of the ascendancy of Inocencio over our young friend. Increased the tone in which he addressed her was no longer the humble and courteous tone of earlier days. He corrected her frequently in her manner delivery. He dictated the attitudes and gestures which she should adopt, and sometimes when the actress did not quite understand his wishes, he allowed himself to address her publicly in rather severe terms, and the way he looked at her was severe still. Our poet was already thundering, enlightening L to the poet, lolling at ease in an armchair with a brayer of hot coals before him, directed the action in as dictatorial manner as either Garcia Gutierrez or Ayala could have done. A mere glance from him sufficed to make Clotilde flush crimson or turn pale. The other actors made no protest out of consideration for her. When she had finished her scene, she came eagerly to take her seat beside her betrothed, who sometimes deigned to welcome her with a hearty smile, and at other times with an "Oly dear little nest," bathed in sunlight, where Inocencio could work in his private study, writing plays while she sat by his side and embroidered in absolute silence. When he was tired, they could talk for a while to let him rest, and then she would give him a kiss and go back again to her work. In the evening, they would go out arm in arm, take a short walk, and then home again, but no more the theater. She abhorred it with all her soul. In the spring, they would go every morning, take a walk, and the actors, at last the opening night, arrived. We were all anxious to see the result. The prevailing opinion was that the play offered little novelty, but since Clotilde had staked her whole soul upon the outcome, a big success was predicted at the dress rehearsal. Our young friend had achieved genuine prodigies. There was a moment when the few of U.S. whom curiosity had brought to witness it rose to our feet, electrified, convulsed, making a most unseemly outcry. You have no conception how marvelously decidedly out of favor with me the noise which Inocencio's friends had been making in regard to the theme of his play, the fact that Clotilde had chosen it for a benefit performance, and the widespread rumor that the celebrated actress was going to win a signal triumph, and it all worked together to help the speculators to dispose of every seat in the house at fabulous prices. I know a marquis who paid Euro 10s for 2 orchestra stalls this room, where we are now sitting was filled just as it is for, and graciously receiving the crowds of visitors who came to see the presence, dictating orders to the call boys and scene shifters regarding the proper setting of the scene, and multiplying his smiles and handshakings to the point of infinity. Claude also seemed more beautiful than ever, and her expressive face revealed the tender emotion which possessed her, as well as her deep anxiety to win laurels for her future husband. The curtain arose, and everyone hurried to occupy his seat in the wings. The entertained fell in a dead silence. Immediately, the waiting room and passageway were filled by Innocentio's friends, who came eagerly to tell him that this first performance of his play was a great success. But what was the matter with Groda? She hardly put any movement into her part, and she was usually so much alive, so tremendously forceful. Our young friend acknowledged that, as a matter of fact, she had felt badly scared, and that this had hampered her seriously. The author, greatly alarmed for Fim, he tried to infuse courage into her by appealing to her vanity as an artist. In short, he did everything imaginable to save his play. The second act began. Crota had a few pathetic scenes in beginning. There was a certain slight disturbance in the audience, and this sufficed to disconcert her completely, and to make her acting near immediately bad, worse than she had ever acted in her whole life. A good deal of coughing was heard, and some loud murmurs of impatience. At the end of the secco, continually calling for her in Asensio. In order to spare her for the trouble, I told her that the author had accepted the situation resignedly, and had left the theater to get a breath of air. The unhappy girl bitterly blamed herself, taking the entire failure on her own shoulders. The curtain rose for the third act, and we all gathered anxiously at the wings. Claudia, by a powerful effort, showed herself at first more self-possessed than in the previous acts, but the audience was in a mood to have yes sought on all sides for her lover. But he had disappeared in her dressing room, where I followed her. She sobbed, groaned, give way to despair, called herself a fool, said that she was going to hire herself out on some farm to tend the geese, and more to the same effect. It cost me some hard work to calm her down, but at last I succeeded, so that she sank into a sort of silent lethargy. In the sorrow which her eyes revealed, I saw that what tormented her horribly was the absence of innocential thou are. But listen, I swear to you by the memory of my father, that I will atone for the humiliation you have just suffered. There is no need for you to atone, my dear girl, replied the poet in a soft tone, under which a disdainful anger could be felt. My family has not achieved an illustrious name through the intercession of any actor from this day henceforth. I gladly renounce the theater and all that is connected with it. Accordingly, I wish you good day, and unclasping the arms that imprison me, thing that you lack, and that is a heart. Here, sir, is my card. And did you not send him your second Don Geronimo? Inquired the medical student. Silence. Exclaimed another. The group here is Clotilde, and, in fact, the charming actress at that moment appeared in the doorway, and her large and sad black eyes, all the more beautiful beneath her white Louis X-15 coiffure, smiled tenderly upon her faithful friends. And The Love of Clotilde by Armando Palacio V.